When the pandemic started in 2020, pretty much every facet of the world shut down. Restaurants, nail salons, movie theaters, and more were all heavily impacted, and for major publishing studios, this basically meant halting all production on movies from those that were just concepts to some that were halfway completed. Unfortunately, since the world has started to reopen, it hasn't felt like movies were quite back yet, but this summer those tides shifted a bit, with nearly every week having a new release that was somewhat hyped up. Whether it was Fast X, The Little Mermaid, Transformers, Barbie, or Oppenheimer, every passing film brought me closer and closer to the feeling I used to get back in 2019. And while all those films had great releases and received some amount of praise, this summer was for the animation fans. I don't know what more I can say about Across the Spider-Verse that hasn't already been said. It's an astonishing movie in absolutely every way. They took a film that some people consider to be the greatest animated movie ever and somehow made it better. Just the mere fact that we get to go to different worlds outside of Miles's adds a great variety. I mean, the whole opening segment in Spider-Gwen's world was incredible, with the almost paintbrush aesthetic and shifting color palettes, helping to add depth to every conversation and confrontation. And that's before they added the Renaissance Vulture. This guy is the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen animated. He's like Da Vinci drawing come to life, with every inch of his suit being deliberately crafted. His weapons all feel like medieval torture devices, and the clashing art style with Gwen's is insane. His inclusion was short, but from that point forward, this movie kept me locked in. From there, we go back to Miles's world, which was great too because of his characterization that's evolved perfectly from the first film. His continuous struggles with his parents feel like a natural progression of how a real-life family might react to some of the concerning aspects in his life, and they create some of the most genuine and heartfelt moments in any superhero movie. This is true for his relationship with Gwen as well, with both of them having a clear longing for the other one while they were apart. The moments they spend swinging around together and just hanging out feel like something out of a real teenager's life, and it makes every tumultuous moment between the two hit so much harder. The only supporting character we really get back is Peter B. Parker, but they make sure every decision he makes is true to his character, and the inclusion of Mayday gives him something worth fighting for. Along with Peter, we get a couple of new players to the team, with Spider-Man India and one of the best characters in the series, Hobie. They're both completely different from anyone else we saw in Into the Spider-Verse and help to make the films not feel too repetitive. On top of those two, the newly introduced villains are badass. The Spot is a great out of left field antagonist who they retroactively added some great depth to without having to do too much. And when you don't see much of him, they absolutely turn him from bad to Chad by the end of the movie, shaping him into the perfect adversary for Spider-Man and Beyond the Spider-Verse. The other villain, Miguel O'Hara, or Spider-Man 2099, also comes off as a threatening and formidable foe throughout the film. I love his claws that just rip through a whole ass train, along with his vampire-like features that help bring a horror-like nature to his whole character that bleeds over into the compound he's built. My main complaint with his character is that his motivation really didn't make much sense to me. I'm sure we'll see it fleshed out more in Beyond the Spider-Verse, but for the time being, I just wasn't a huge fan of his character arc. There were also a few spots throughout the film that seemed like they could have been the definitive ending, but it just kept going. With that being said though, the ending we got was awesome, and the cliffhanger didn't bother me at all. Those final few minutes kept me on the edge of my seat, and I'm ecstatic to see what comes next. Across the Spider-Verse is probably the best movie I've seen all year, and maybe the best I've seen in the 2020s. If you haven't already seen it, do yourself a favor and check it out. Unlike this next movie.
Peach, you're so cool.
At the time of its release in theaters, I thought about making a video talking about all the problems with the Super Mario Bros. Movie and why I didn't understand the hype around it. But the discourse surrounding these negative online reviews made me really push back and decide that I didn't want that to be my first video in almost 8 months. So now that it's been out on streaming and the crowds have become a bit more quiet on the film, I thought it might be a better time to talk about it. The Super Mario Bros. Movie feels like a byproduct of the failings of Nintendo. For nearly the entire span of Mario's life, they refused to add a full-blown story into any of their Mario platformers. There are a couple of exceptions with Super Mario Sunshine and parts of Super Mario Galaxy, but in the end, most games just boil down to Mario trying to save Princess Peach from Bowser. For many people, myself included, this has become the main complaint in the Mario series, because Nintendo has done a great job adapting the gameplay and visuals to make these games some of the best on the market. The issue with all of that is that the Super Mario Bros. Movie is a movie. You don't get to move around as Mario and explore the world. You're not able to search for hidden moons or star coins. You're just stuck in place watching one of the most basic stories put to screen. The argument I've seen most people make is that it's made for kids. It doesn't need to have adult themes or an incredible story. But you can't judge movies like that. Animation is a medium that's always been primarily made for children, but the best products have been adapted to make it something enjoyable and engaging for everyone watching. Across the Spider-Verse, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and even something similar in concept like the Lego Movie have all taken these leaps to make their product something that a kid can love just as much as an adult, even if it's for different reasons. It's a baffling take that I saw from so many different people out there, some of which vehemently bashed both of the Sonic movies for some of the same problems. And while this is the main problem, it isn't the only one. When the movie was first announced, the internet had a frenzy with some of the voice actor casting. It's again like Nintendo didn't have a real vision for the movie, so they just threw out some big names like Chris Pratt as Mario or Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong. This worked with some characters like Jack Black as Bowser or Charlie Day as Luigi, but too many of them turned into their actors as the film moved along. They also made the odd decision to cram as much as they could into the 1 hour and 30-minute runtime. They needed the full Mushroom Kingdom, all of Donkey Kong World, a 10-minute section of them having a Mario Kart race, a 20-minute section in the real world, and the fucking blue-shelled Koopa amounting to nothing. They tried to do so much with so little instead of making it a more focused story and adding some of the stuff in the sequels that were always going to happen. So the question must be raised. Why is this movie included in the greatest animated summer ever video? That's strictly because of the fans. I have to admit, while I have a lot of problems with the movie, there's also some really great stuff for Mario fans. The animation style was beautiful. It perfectly fits the game's art direction and brought some of the most iconic video game imagery to the big screen. The few platforming sequences in the movie are a lot of fun to watch, and every time there's a new power-up introduced, it's really cool to know what's about to happen. There were also a lot of really fun Easter eggs that just brought a nostalgic touch to the movie and made me smile more than once. So, is it great? No. In my opinion, it's not even good. But so many people spoke out that loved this movie that I would say give it a watch if you had any interest at all. The box office numbers speak for themselves, and I just hope we can see something better in the sequel. Hopefully something as good as this next film. Since the original Toy Story came out, every studio has strived to make the perfect animation style. The goal was always, how can we make everything look more like the real world? And around 2015, I think Pixar had hit that peak. When the trailer for The Good Dinosaur released, the only thing I heard about the movie was everyone saying how realistic every shot looked. And even though it ended up being really lame, I think the film broke new ground in the field and every company wanted in. Of course, you still had studios like Laika coming out with some beautiful movies, but the bigger studios were just milking this realistic style for everything it was worth. Then, in 2018, Into the Spider-Verse sent shockwaves through the animation community. There was so much praise and admiration for the way the film looked, with many people lauding it as the greatest art style in animation history, and it looked to pave the way for creatives to develop a new approach on designing their films. But for a few years, it didn't seem like that was the case. Disney still exclusively used this hyper-realistic art style, and I didn't see any other studios really trying to adapt what they were doing. And sure, some of this was due to the pandemic, but it was sad to see this golden opportunity wasted. Luckily, this past winter, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish continued with this trend, with DreamWorks taking an anime-esque approach to the project and made again what was one of the most stylized movies of the last decade. And the train wasn't stopping there. We of course got Across the Spider-Verse this year, and now Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Mutant Mayhem. Since I haven't seen many studios strive for these new art styles, anytime I see a trailer for something that looks different, I'm instantly interested, and that didn't change with Mutant Mayhem. I don't have any nostalgic or emotional ties to TMNT outside of watching the 2007 movie as a child, so there was no reason for me to be excited for this new one, but it just looked great, and I'm happy to report that it was. Again, just starting with this animation. Jeff Rowe looked to take a similar approach from his previous movie, The Mitchells vs. the Machines, and make the art style look almost unfinished, like a drawing in his notebook. And sure, there are some rough-looking character designs, namely Giancarlo Esposito's Baxter Stockman at the beginning of the film, but everything else is incredible. It can be a bit jarring on the eyes, and I can understand why some folks might not like it, but it perfectly matches the tone and nature of the film they were trying to make. The style emits vibes from a bored high school student just drawing in his textbook, or someone trying to express themselves through their artwork, and that's carried over immaculately by the voice actors. Micah Abbey, Shimon Brown Jr., Nicholas Cantu, and Brady Noon as the Turtles were all names that I didn't recognize, but I hope become mainstays because they each did a phenomenal job. They felt like real teenagers because they are real teenagers, and having them be able to improv their lines together was a stroke of genius. All of the voice work was expertly done, from the moments of them talking about Riz to the kids discussing what life would be like on the outside world. I just truly can't give them enough praise. The Turtles aren't the only great part of the film though, because the rest of the mutant crew is awesome. Jackie Chan, John Cena, Seth Rogen, and Hannibal Buress each do a magnificent job portraying their own mutants, but the real standouts were Paul Rudd and Ice Cube. Paul Rudd's Mondo Gecko is just a chill-ass viber who is constantly bringing laughter to the theater. I felt every moment he was on screen they used him perfectly, and his companionship with Michelangelo just made too much sense. Ice Cube Superfly, on the other hand, is the absolute antithesis to the Turtles. All he can think about is how terrible humans are and what they've done to ruin his life. He's not pure evil, but he's pure to who he is, and Ice Cube really sells his performance, making for one of my favorite villains in recent memory. Unfortunately though, the film isn't all great. Every single joke and pop culture reference throughout made my audience at least chuckle, but there were plenty of moments where it felt like they were laying it on too thick. It was a constant back and forth of being pulled in and out of the movie that by the end I was just frustrated. I also just really don't enjoy gross out humor, and one scene in particular was super hard to watch. But by far the biggest issue is just how predictable the story is. I again understand that this is supposed to be a kids movie, but that doesn't mean you can't have some surprises throughout. I struggled to find a moment that left me shocked, or even a section that was unexpected. There were so many scenes that set up to be a great twist, but the film always took the safer option. It's unfortunate to have everything go exactly as I thought it would, but it doesn't ruin the movie at all. Even with the story being predictable, the characters and dialogue were done extremely well, the action and tense moments kept me on the edge of my seat, and the story still makes a lot of sense. In the end, Mutant Mayhem was a ton of fun and made me a fan of a series that's been running for nearly 40 years. It's a movie that kept me smiling throughout and has catapulted in one of my favorite animated films ever. It was a feat that I never could have expected, and it was the perfect way to end the greatest animated summer.